At my 38th birthday dinner, my mother stood in a private room at Bellafina's, raised her glass in front of 12 relatives, and told everyone I had been adopted for the tax benefits. My sister laughed. My aunt smiled. My father looked down at his plate like silence could protect him. What none of them knew was that the white envelope in my lap held the deed to their house, the same house they had been living in for almost 6 years, the same house my mother bragged she had saved through faith and hard work. My name is Auden Whitaker, and I am a real estate attorney in Asheville, North Carolina. I had come that night to give my parents Hawthorne Lane free and clear, but when my mother said I was never really one of them, I put my hand on that envelope and asked one question that made my father's face go pale. Mom, who do you think owns your house? Chapter 1: The Envelope at Bellafina. At my 38th birthday dinner, my mother raised her wine glass in a private room at Bellafina's and told 12 people that I had been adopted for the tax benefits. The cake was still in front of me. 38 thin candles burned low into white frosting, their flames bending every time someone shifted in a chair. The Laurel Room was warm from bodies and wine, and the kind of forced family cheer my mother had always been able to arrange better than anyone I knew. Auden Whitaker stood at the head of the table in a cream-colored dress, one hand curved around a glass of Chardonnay, smiling like a woman about to give a blessing. Then she looked straight at me and said, "We adopted you for the tax benefits. You were never really one of us." For 1 second, nobody moved. Then my older sister Blythe laughed. It was not a shocked laugh. It was not nervous. It was the small, bright laugh of someone hearing a private family truth finally said out loud. Her husband, Grant, still had his phone lifted, recording what he probably thought would be a funny birthday toast. My Aunt Celeste did not look surprised at all. She only tilted her head, her mouth pulling into that thin, satisfied smile she wore whenever blood became the subject. My father, Calvin, stared down at his plate as if the answer to everything might be hiding under the folded linen napkin. Deanne Rourke, my grandmother's old friend, was the only person who looked at me like something cruel had actually happened. I did not cry. I did not stand up. I did not throw my glass or ask my mother how she could say something like that in front of an entire table. I only lowered my hand into my lap and touched the white envelope resting against my dress. No one at that table knew what was inside it. It was not a birthday card. It was not a check. It was not some long, trembling letter about all the ways the Whitakers had hurt me over the past 31 years. Inside that envelope was the paperwork for Hawthorne Lane, the house my parents still called their home. The house my mother still bragged about keeping through faith, sacrifice, and good old-fashioned hard work. The house she thought belonged to her and my father. I had come to Bellafina's that night to give it back to them. That was the part that would have sounded insane to anyone who had known my family for more than 10 minutes. I did not come to my birthday dinner planning revenge. I came with a gift so large I had almost been embarrassed by it. I came thinking that maybe, after 31 years in the Whitaker family, after every holiday where I had been introduced with the word adopted attached to my name like a warning label, after every picture where I stood half a step outside the center, after every time Marin made my childhood sound like a ministry project, there might still be one door left to open. I thought if I handed Calvin and Marin the deed to Hawthorne Lane free and clear, they might finally see me, not as the child they took in, not as the charity case who owed them gratitude forever. As their daughter, one sentence ended that fantasy. A few hours earlier, I had been sitting in my office at Kessler and Vane Real Estate Law in downtown Asheville, watching the late afternoon sun slide across a stack of documents Maya Chen had placed on my desk. Maya was my paralegal, and she had the careful silence of someone who knew a file was personal but respected me enough not to say so too quickly. She set each page down in order, perfectly aligned: the 2019 foreclosure notice, the auction purchase record, the LLC title record for Quiet Ridge Holdings, Porty tax receipts from 2019 through 2024, the mortgage payoff letter dated October 2024, a copy of the $1 a year lease, the Mission Hospital payment confirmation from 2021, and on top, the unrecorded quitclaim deed. I stared at that last document longer than the rest. My name was not printed across it in some dramatic way. Real estate documents rarely look dramatic. They look boring. They look like paper that can sit unnoticed in a drawer while lives are built or destroyed around them. That was the thing most people never understood about houses. The walls were emotional. The porch was emotional. The kitchen table where your father drank coffee and your mother made you feel like a guest in your own life, that was emotional. But ownership was ink. Nina Alvarez came into my office without knocking because she was the only person in the building who could get away with it. She looked at the file, then at me, and said, "You're really doing it." I slid the quitclaim deed into the center of the desk. "I think so." Nina leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Auden, don't transfer a house to people who still introduce you like a charitable deduction." The words landed harder than I wanted them to because they were true. Marin had never introduced me as my daughter Auden. It was always our adopted daughter. Sometimes she said it warmly. Sometimes she said it proudly. Sometimes she said it like a receipt she was still waiting for heaven to reimburse. I picked up the foreclosure notice instead of answering. Nina softened a little. "You saved that house. You paid the taxes. You paid off the mortgage. You paid for Calvin's surgery. If they can't see you now, a deed won't fix that." "Maybe not," I said. "But I want to know, now what? Whether they would look at me differently if they knew." Nina sighed. And for a moment she was not my colleague. She was my friend, the woman who had watched me win title disputes for strangers, with less hesitation than I used to set boundaries with my own family. She tapped the deed with one finger. "This has not been recorded with the county. Until you file it, nothing transfers. Quiet Ridge Holdings still owns Hawthorne Lane. You still control the property. I know, and the mortgage payoff is clear, so yes, if you file, it can transfer free and clear. But Auden, once you hand people a house, you cannot make them love you correctly." I almost smiled at that because it sounded like something Grandma Eloise would have said if she had been a real estate attorney instead of a school librarian. Grandma Eloise was Calvin's mother, and she was the only Whitaker who never made me feel borrowed. She never called me adopted unless a form required it. She called me her granddaughter with the simple certainty of someone naming the weather. Before I left the office, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the last birthday card she ever gave me. The paper had softened at the fold from all the times I had opened it. Her handwriting was shaky by then, but still clear enough to hurt. "You were never extra. You were the answer this family didn't deserve." I read it once, then slid it into the envelope with the deed. Not because I thought I would need courage, because some foolish part of me thought maybe Eloise should be there if the Whitakers finally became whole. By the time I reached Bellafina's, the sky over Asheville had turned that blue-gray color that makes every window look warmer than it is. The Laurel Room was already set up when I arrived. White tablecloth, gold-rimmed plates, candles in low glass holders, a cake waiting on a side table with my name written in looping script. Marin had chosen everything. She was good at that. The right restaurant, the right photographs, the right smile, the right version of family for people outside the family. I kept the envelope in my lap through appetizers, through Blythe's little comments about my coat, through Celeste asking whether foreclosure law ever made me feel predatory, through Marin telling Uncle Reed that she and Calvin had kept Hawthorne Lane through faith and discipline. "Nobody handed us anything," Marin said. I remember looking at Calvin then. His fork paused halfway to his plate. He did not look at me. I touched the envelope under the table. I almost pulled it out right there. I almost stood up before dessert and told them that Hawthorne Lane was no longer in danger, that the mortgage had been paid off, that the investor they had praised for years was not a stranger at all. I almost told them I had prepared the deed, and if they wanted, by Monday morning, the house would legally be theirs again. If Marin had given me 2 more minutes, she would have had the house she believed she deserved. Instead, the server brought in the cake. 38 candles flickered in front of me. Grant lifted his phone. Blythe sat straighter, like she knew a performance was coming. Calvin whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear, "Marin, don't." My mother ignored him. She tapped her spoon against her wine glass, smiled at the room, and said she wanted to say something honest before I blew out the candles. Then she called me a tax benefit. Blythe laughed. The room went still. I let the silence stretch until my sister's laughter had nowhere left to go. Then I looked at Marin and asked quietly, "Mom, who do you think owns your house?" For the first time that night, my mother's smile did not know what to do. Calvin's face went pale before Marin even understood the question. I lifted the white envelope from my lap and placed it on the table between the cake and the candles. I did not open it yet, but my father knew. He knew the conversation had just moved somewhere he could not follow, stop, or survive by staying silent. Chapter 2: The House on Hawthorne Lane. To understand why my father went pale at one simple question, you have to understand that Hawthorne Lane had almost stopped being a Whitaker house 6 years earlier. I was born in 1987, but I did not become Auden Whitaker until 1994. when Calvin and Marin signed the adoption papers and brought me into the 2-story blue-gray house at the end of Hawthorne Lane. I was 7 years old enough to know when adults were smiling for me and when they were smiling for themselves. Marin never let people forget how I came into the family. "This is Auden, our adopted daughter," she would say at church picnics, grocery stores, school open houses, anywhere someone might mistake me for simply hers. She said adopted softly sometimes, almost sweetly, but she always said it. The word sat in front of daughter like a locked gate. Blythe was 3 years older than me and born into the family the regular way, as Marin liked to put it when she thought I was not listening. Blythe had Calvin's eyes, Marin's smile, and a place at the center of every photograph. I had a bedroom, clothes, dinner at 6, decent schools, and birthday presents wrapped in paper Marin picked out herself. I was not starved. I was not abandoned. That was what made the loneliness harder to explain. I was cared for, but not claimed. Grandma Eloise was the only exception. Auden Whitaker was Calvin's mother, a retired school librarian with silver hair, soft cardigans, and a way of looking at children like they were entire worlds, not projects adults had taken on. She never called me adopted unless a form forced her to. To her, I was simply her granddaughter. Once, when I was 9, I asked her if I should be grateful Marin and Calvin had chosen me. Eloise had been washing peaches at the kitchen sink. She turned off the water, dried her hands, and knelt in front of me. "You are not a guest in this family, Auden," she said. I held on to that sentence longer than I held on to most people. Maybe that was why I became a real estate attorney. Houses were supposed to mean belonging, but I learned early that belonging could be denied even when your name was on the Christmas stocking. At Kessler and Vane Real Estate Law, I specialized in title disputes, foreclosure, and deed fraud. People came to me when somebody was trying to take a home quietly, politely, with paper. A few months before my birthday, a 72-year-old former piano teacher named Harriet Voss sat across from me in my office with a folder in her lap and shame all over her face. Her nephew, Logan, had told her she needed to sign some insurance paperwork after a roof leak. Something in the document made her uneasy, so her neighbor drove her to us. Maya Chen scanned the papers first, then brought them to me with her eyebrows raised. "This is not insurance paperwork," she said. I checked the county records, the notary stamp, the legal description, and the title chain. Logan was not trying to repair Harriet's roof. He was trying to move her house out from under her using a deed wrapped in friendly language. When I called the notary, her voice changed the moment I gave her the date. "I never notarized anything for Mrs. Voss that day," she said. By sunset, we had filed an affidavit, frozen the recording, and started the process of putting Harriet's house into a trust where Logan's charm could not reach it. Harriet cried in my conference room. "I never thought family would do that," she whispered. I did not tell her the truth, which was that family did that all the time. Not always with fists, not always with shouting. Most houses were not stolen with crowbars. They were stolen with signatures. That was how I found Hawthorne Lane in 2019. I was reviewing foreclosure notices for a client when the address appeared on the screen. 184 Hawthorne Lane, Asheville, North Carolina, my childhood house. The porch where Eloise used to bring lemonade in the summer. The kitchen where Marin taught Blythe to make pie and told me to set the table. The stair rail I had gripped the night I realized nobody was coming to tuck me in because I was already too old to need that. According to Marin, the house was in pre-foreclosure. Nobody had told me. Calvin's small construction business had been bleeding money after a bad winter, and 3 clients who delayed payment until delay became refusal. Marin's knee had gotten worse, and the medical bills were stacking up. They were weeks away from losing Hawthorne Lane, and still they had not called me. I knew why. If I had offered help directly, Marin would have turned my check into an insult. She would have told everyone Auden thinks we are helpless now. Auden thinks lawyer money makes her better than us. She would rather lose a roof than admit the girl she took in had become the woman who could save it. So I did not call her. In 2016, I had formed a small real estate holding company called Quiet Ridge Holdings LLC. Nothing flashy, no family name, no sign on a door, just a clean structure I used for small property investments and liability separation. In 2019, Quiet Ridge bought Hawthorne Lane at the foreclosure sale for $318,000. I used my savings for the down payment and carried the mortgage under the LLC. Quiet Ridge became the legal owner. I was the single member. Calvin and Marin never saw my name. I hired Auden Whitaker, a property manager with a calm voice and the emotional range of a bank lobby, to handle everything. Auden contacted them after the sale and explained that an investor had purchased the property and preferred stable tenants over vacancy. He offered them a lease for $1 a year. Marin accepted because Owen gave her a story she could survive. It is an investor tax strategy, he told her. The owner values occupancy and privacy. That was all she needed. A stranger's generosity was a miracle. Mine would have been humiliation. Within a month, Marin was telling people at St. Mark's Community Church that God had kept Hawthorne Lane in the family. Reverend Paul Whitcomb praised her faith. The women's group praised her resilience. Diane Rourke mentioned it to me gently one afternoon, not knowing what I had done. Your mother says they held on to the house, Diane said. I smiled and said nothing. From 2019 through 2024, I paid the property taxes. Owen handled maintenance, insurance, lease renewals, the broken water heater, the roof patch after a storm, the cracked front step Calvin kept meaning to fix himself. Every year, Calvin and Marin signed a lease with Quiet Ridge Holdings. Every year, Marin told people nobody had handed them anything. In October 2024, I paid off the mortgage with money from a large settlement. By March 2025, Hawthorne Lane was worth about $612,000, and for the first time since the foreclosure sale, I could transfer it free and clear if I chose to. The house was not the only thing I had paid for. In May 2021, Calvin needed heart surgery at Mission Hospital, Asheville. Insurance covered most of it, but not all. The remaining balance was $46,800, and the surgery date was at risk until someone paid. Blythe was the one who sent me the invoice. She did not send it to ask for help. She sent it to complain. Can you believe they expect us to deal with this? She wrote. The photo showed the balance, the due date, and the account number clearly in the top corner. I called the billing office that afternoon. A coordinator named Jocelyn Price answered. I did not ask for medical details. I did not need them. I gave the account number and asked if I could make a payment toward the balance. Are you a family member? She asked. I looked at the invoice on my desk and almost laughed. Yes, I said, but please list it as a private benefactor. The payment cleared before midnight. Calvin had surgery on schedule. He lived. For a while I thought that secret would stay buried too. But Calvin was not stupid. He saw the hospital statement later. He saw the words paid by private benefactor. He saw Quiet Ridge Holdings on the lease renewal. Once he asked Owen who owned the company. The owner values privacy, Owen said. And Calvin let the answer end there. That was what I understood only later. My father did not fail to know. He chose not to know all the way. Because if he knew, he would have to say my name. If he said my name, he would have to admit I was the reason he still had a roof and a heartbeat. And if he admitted that, he would have to defend me the next time Marin called me something less than daughter. A few days before my birthday, Owen called me while I was leaving court. Your mother asked whether the owner would ever consider transferring title, he said. I stopped in the parking garage with my keys in my hand.
Why?
Owen hesitated. She said the house belongs with family. I remember staring at the concrete wall in front of me until the painted number blurred. The house had been with family for 6 years. It had been protected by family, repaired by family, taxed by family, paid off by family. It was just the wrong kind of family for Marin to acknowledge. That night, I pulled the unrecorded quitclaim deed from my office file. I added the mortgage payoff letter and Grandma Eloise's birthday card. I slid everything into the white envelope and told myself this was the last chance. Not because Marin deserved the house, because some part of me still wanted to believe Eloise had been right. I was not a guest in that family. And by Monday morning, if Calvin and Marin could prove they knew that too, Hawthorne Lane would finally say so on paper. Chapter 3: Blood Family. At the table on the morning of my birthday, my phone buzzed while I was standing in my bedroom, fastening the buttons on the coat I had spent too much money on and almost returned twice. It was the Whitaker family group chat. Marin had named it Family Blessings years ago, which told you almost everything you needed to know about my mother. Even a group chat had to perform gratitude. Her message sat at the bottom of the thread. Tonight we clear the air. Family should not carry old misunderstandings. Celeste replied first with a red heart. Truth heals, Blythe answered a minute later, as long as nobody turns it into lawyer theater. Then Grant sent a little camera emoji. I stood there holding my phone, staring at those 4 messages until the screen dimmed in my hand. That was the first moment I understood the dinner might not be a dinner at all. It might be a stage. And I had been invited because every stage needs someone to stand under the light. I still went. I put the white envelope in my bag. I put on the coat, not because I wanted anyone to admire it, but because it reminded me that I had built a life outside of Hawthorne Lane. I had a career, a mortgage-free property in an LLC, a downtown office with my name on the door, and enough dignity not to shrink just because Blythe knew where to aim. The Laurel Room at Bellafina's looked exactly like Marin, polished, warm, arranged. The table was long and narrow, dressed in white linen with low candles down the center. Gold-rimmed plates sat at each place. Wine glasses caught the light. In the corner on a side table was a white birthday cake with my name written across it in soft blue icing. For a second, before anyone arrived, I let myself imagine a different night. I imagined Calvin tearing up when I told him the mortgage was gone. I imagined Marin touching the deed with both hands, and realizing that the child she kept calling adopted had protected the only house she still cared about. I imagined Blythe quiet for once. Not kind, maybe, but quiet. Then Diane Rourke walked in and saved me from the fantasy. She was nearly 70, tall and narrow, with a silver bob, and the kind of posture retired school principals never quite lose. She had been Grandma Eloise's friend for almost 40 years, and when she hugged me, she held on like she meant it. "Your grandmother would have loved seeing you tonight," she said. That nearly broke me, not because it was sad, because for one breath I believed it. I believed Eloise would have sat beside me, patted my hand under the table, and whispered that I was doing a good thing, that I was not weak for wanting to give them the house, that forgiveness and foolishness could sometimes look similar until the last possible second. "I brought something for them," I told Diane quietly. Her eyes moved to my bag, then back to my face. "Then I hope they deserve it." I did not know how to answer that, so I smiled. Marin arrived 10 minutes later and immediately began adjusting the room. She moved 2 candles closer together, switched Uncle Reed's place card with Celeste's, asked the server whether the cake could be brought in with all candles lit, not half lit, because presentation mattered. Then she looked at me and touched the sleeve of my coat. "That's new," she said. "It is. Very polished." From Marin, polished could mean beautiful or cold or expensive in a way that needed moral correction. I had learned not to ask which. Calvin came in behind her. He hugged me with one arm and smelled faintly of aftershave and wintergreen mints. His heart surgery had left him thinner, softer around the eyes. For 1 second, his hand tightened on my shoulder like he wanted to say something. "Happy birthday, Auden," he said. "Thanks, Dad." He looked at me when I said Dad, then looked away too quickly. Blythe arrived with Grant, late enough to be noticed and cheerful enough to make it seem intentional. She was 41, but she still entered rooms like the family had been waiting for her to complete them. Grant followed with his phone already in his hand. "Auden," Blythe said, leaning in for a kiss that landed somewhere beside my cheek. "That coat is serious. Real estate law must be treating you well. Work has been busy, I bet. Foreclosures, right?" She gave a little laugh. "I don't know how you do that. I'd feel awful making money when people are losing homes." The envelope in my bag suddenly felt heavier. Celeste Harlan arrived next, smelling like rose perfume and church coffee. She kissed Marin, squeezed Blythe's hand, and gave me the same smile she gave donation boxes. "There's the birthday girl," she said. 38. My goodness. Time does keep moving, doesn't it? It does. And still working all those hours? Still working. "Well," Celeste said, settling into her chair, "some people build families. Some people build careers." Diane looked down at her menu. Calvin reached for his water. Marin pretended not to hear. Dinner began the way Whitaker dinners always began, with small compliments sharpened just enough to cut if you grabbed them wrong. Blythe talked about Ella's tuition at Cedarbrook Academy and how everything had gotten more expensive. Then she moved on to the kitchen renovation she and Grant had paused because contractors were impossible and interest rates were criminal. Grant nodded at the correct moments. Calvin murmured something about costs. Marin looked sympathetic in the direction of her real daughter. "We've been talking about refinancing," Blythe said, "but honestly, Mom and Dad should really put Hawthorne Lane in a trust someday. Keep it protected, keep it with the bloodline." My fork stopped just above my plate. Marin smiled. "One day that house will go where it belongs." Calvin's hand tightened around his glass. Deanne glanced at me. Celeste lifted her wine with a satisfied little nod. "Blood matters," she said. "Love is one thing. Inheritance is another." The words should have made me angry. Instead, they made me reach for my bag. I was so close to taking out the envelope right there. So close to laying the deed beside the breadbasket and saying, if the house needs to stay with family, then maybe we should talk about who family actually is. But before I could move, Blythe turned toward me. "Auden probably doesn't care about roots anyway," she said. "Career women don't need family property. They have office views and expensive coats." I let my hand fall back into my lap. Not because she had won, because I wanted to see how far they would go if I did not stop them. Halfway through the meal, Marin began telling the story of 2019. She told it the way she always told stories about hardship, with herself in the center and God in the supporting role. She talked about Calvin's business trouble, her knee, the bills, the stress. She said there were nights she and Calvin sat in the kitchen praying over the checkbook. But we held on, she said, touching Calvin's arm. Through faith, discipline, and dignity. Nobody handed us anything. Nobody handed us anything. I looked at my father. He did not look back. He knew. Maybe not all of it then, but enough. Enough to understand that sentence was a match dropped on dry grass. Blythe took a sip of wine and said, "Some people sent a card and called that support." The hospital invoice flashed in my mind. Her text, her complaint, the account number in the corner, the payment that cleared before midnight. Calvin's surgery schedule saved by money nobody at that table knew had come from me. My mouth filled with words I did not say. Celeste leaned back with a sigh. Auden was lucky, really. Not every child gets taken into a family like this. There are bonds you can create, of course, but there are others that simply are. I looked at the candles, then at the ceiling, then at my father's hands folded too tightly in his lap. Some bonds could not be created by paperwork. That much was true, but some lies could only be killed by it. Grant lifted his phone now and then, catching little pieces of the table. Blythe noticed and smiled. "Get Mom's speech later," she whispered. Grant grinned. "This is content." I almost laughed. Marin was watching me more closely now. Not like a mother watching a daughter. Like a woman checking whether her audience was ready. That was when I understood her better than I wanted to. Marin was not cruel because she had no feelings. She was cruel because she had too many feelings she could not afford to name. She was afraid of being exposed. Afraid people would know Hawthorne Lane had almost been lost. Afraid the woman she had spent decades presenting as a rescued child had become the friends who rescued her. So she did what she always did. She pushed me lower so she could stand higher. When the plates were cleared, Marin began the adoption story. She said they had taken me in during a difficult season. She said it had required sacrifice. She said not everyone understood the cost of raising a child who did not come from your own blood. Deanne did not smile. Blythe did. Celeste nodded like she was hearing scripture. Calvin said, very softly, "Maybe not tonight." Marin kept going. I stood before she could finish and said I needed the restroom. In the mirror, under the soft gold lights, I looked calmer than I felt. I locked myself in the stall, opened my bag, and slid out the white envelope. I did not need to check every page again, but I did anyway. The deed was there. So were the payoff letter, the tax receipts, the lease, and the hospital confirmation that could undo every lie Marin had told at that table. Grandma Eloise's card was tucked behind them. I opened it last. "You were never extra." My thumb rested on that sentence. I had not decided yet. That was the worst part. Even after the bloodline comments, even after Marin's performance, even after Calvin's silence, some injured, loyal part of me was still willing to give them one last chance to choose decency. I put everything back in the envelope and returned to the dining room. The cake was on the table now. 38 candles burned in front of my chair. Marin stood with her wineglass in hand. Grant lifted his phone. Blythe sat straighter, almost eager. Calvin's face had gone gray around the mouth. As I sat, he whispered, "Marin, don't." My mother smiled at the room. "Before Auden blows out the candles, I want to say something honest." I placed the envelope across my lap and understood that there are rooms you enter as one person and leave as someone else entirely. Chapter 4. Wone's your house? Marin lifted her glass a little higher, as if the room had been waiting for her permission to become honest. "I know people like to make adoption sound simple," she said, "like love fixes everything. But families carry things. Parents carry things. Your father and I carried a lot when we took Auden in." Nobody reached for their wine. Blythe sat with her hands folded around her glass, watching me in that bright, hungry way she used to watch me when we were girls, and Marin was about to decide which one of us had been selfish. Marin kept going. "People praised us for it, of course. They always did. But they never understood what it costs to raise a child who wasn't really yours." Diane's face changed first. Calvin closed his eyes. Marin looked directly at me then, and her smile became almost tender, which somehow made it worse. "We adopted you for the tax benefits, Auden. You were never really one of us." Blythe laughed. It was quick, sharp, and automatic, like a match striking. Grant's phone stayed up, because he had not yet understood that he was recording the moment his wife's family changed shape forever. Celeste's mouth curved into a small smile. Uncle Reed looked from Marin to me, confused, waiting for someone else to tell him whether this was supposed to be funny. Cousin Laurel lowered her fork to the edge of her plate. Deanne stared at Marin as if she had just watched a stranger step into my mother's skin. I did not move. That surprised Marin. I saw it in the slight tightening around her eyes. She had expected tears. She had expected me to shrink or defend myself, or make the scene Blythe had warned everyone I would make. She had built the room so I could fall apart in it, so I let the silence do the work. Blythe's laughter thinned, then stopped. The candles burned lower. Marin still held her glass, but her fingers had tightened around the stem. "That's interesting, Mom," I said. Blythe leaned forward. "Auden, don't make a scene." I turned my head and looked at her. "I haven't even opened the folder yet." That was when Grant lowered the phone half an inch. Marin frowned. "What folder?" I did not answer her right away. I looked at the cake, at my name in blue icing, at the flames trembling like they knew something we did not. "The tax benefit you're talking about," I said, "doesn't work the way you think. Adoption credits are not some 31-year income stream. If you qualified for anything back then, it was limited, one time, and not even close to the cost of raising a child." Marin's mouth twitched. "You would turn this into a tax lecture." "No," I said. "I'm turning it into the truth." The room went still again. "You didn't say tax benefits because it was true. You said it because it made me sound like a transaction." Celeste shifted in her chair. "Auden, your mother is only saying there were sacrifices." I kept my eyes on Marin. "Mom, who do you think owns Hawthorne Lane?" Marin blinked once, then let out a small laugh. "Your father and I do." I looked at Calvin. "Dad?" He did not answer. That was the moment Marin's smile slipped. Not because she understood yet, but because Calvin did. His face had gone pale in a way I had only seen once before, in a hospital room in 2021 when a nurse had explained the risks of his surgery. "Marin," he said, his voice thin. But it was too late. I lifted the white envelope from my lap and placed it beside the cake. I opened it carefully, not fast, not angry. I had spent my whole career teaching clients that panic made paper look weaker than it was. The first page I set down was the 2019 foreclosure notice. "This is the notice filed on Hawthorne Lane 6 years ago," I said. "You were a few weeks from losing the house." Marin's face hardened. "That was private." "The county filed it," I said. "That made it public." I placed the auction purchase record beside it. Quiet Ridge Holdings LLC bought the house at foreclosure sale for $318,000. Blythe's forehead creased. "What is Quiet Ridge?" I looked at her. "Me." The word landed heavier than any speech could have. I set down the LLC title record next. Diane reached for it first, not to interfere, but because she understood paperwork enough to know when a room needed a witness. Her eyes moved over the page. "It lists Auden," she said softly. "Quiet Ridge Holdings, single member." Celeste stopped smiling. Marin shook her head. No, that is not possible." I placed the lease on the table. "You and Dad have signed a lease with Quiet Ridge every year since 2019, $1 a year. Owen Pike managed it because I knew you would rather accept a miracle from a stranger than help from me." Calvin made a sound that was almost my name, but not quite. "You did not accept help from your adopted daughter," I said. "You accepted it from an invisible investor, because that protected your pride." Marin's cheeks flushed. "You tricked us. I kept you housed." I placed the property tax receipts down next, one after another. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. Every year you told people nobody handed you anything. I paid the taxes. Blythe stared at the stack like it might rearrange itself into something easier to hate. Then I set down the mortgage payoff letter. The mortgage was paid off in October 2024. That means the house can be transferred free and clear. Marin's eyes flicked to the envelope. She saw the deed before I held it up. "This is the quitclaim deed I prepared," I said. "It has not been recorded with the county. It has not been filed. It has no effect unless I choose to file it." My mother's lips parted. "For my birthday," I said, "I came here to give you Hawthorne Lane." No one spoke. I let that truth sit at the table with the cake and the dying candles. Then I reached for the final document, Mission Hospital, Asheville. Payment confirmation. May 2021. Calvin looked at it and covered his mouth. "The remaining balance on Dad's heart surgery was $46,800, I said. "It was paid by a private benefactor." Blythe's face had gone white now. I turned to her. "You sent me the invoice. You called it not your problem. I paid it before midnight." Blythe did not answer. Calvin's shoulders shook once. He tried to hide it, but grief has a way of making cowards visible. I looked at him. "How long have you known?" He stared at the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low that everyone had to lean toward it. "Long enough to be ashamed." Marin turned on him. "Calvin." He shook his head without looking at her. "I saw the lease renewal," he said. "I saw the hospital statement. I didn't know all of it at first, but I knew enough." "Enough for what?" I asked. His eyes filled. "Enough to ask, enough to say something." "But you didn't know." I nodded once because I had already known the answer. Hearing it just gave the wound a shape. You let her call me Charity while you were living inside mine. That was when Marin found her voice again. This is disgusting, she snapped. You bought our house behind our backs. You let us live there like fools so you could sit here and humiliate us. This is manipulation. This is financial abuse. I almost smiled because even then she could not hear herself. You had a roof because I signed the mortgage, I said. Dad had surgery because I paid the bill. Tonight I came to give you the deed. You called me a tax break. Marin looked around the table, searching for rescue. She did not find it. Deanne stood. Her chair made a soft scrape against the floor. But in that room it sounded like a gavel. Marin, she said, she saved your home. She saved Calvin's life. And you thanked her by humiliating her in front of all of us. No one corrected Diane. No one told her she had misunderstood. For the first time in my life, Marin was not controlling the room. Blythe leaned toward Grant and hissed, "Stop recording." Grant's thumb hovered over the screen. I looked at him. "No, keep it. For once, let the family hear exactly what was said." Grant froze. Cousin Laurel saw the phone was still recording. So did Marin. So did I. I picked up the unrecorded deed. Marin stared at it with the expression of a woman watching a door close from the wrong side. "I came here to give you Hawthorne Lane," I said. "I am leaving with it still mine." Then I leaned forward and blew out all 38 candles myself. Nobody sang. Nobody touched the cake. The only things left on the table were the papers, the smoke curling up from the dead candles, and the truth Marin could no longer force back into my mouth. Chapter 5. The leash she never expunged. Marin moved first. Her hand shot toward the closest stack of papers, not fast enough to take them, but fast enough to tell me she wanted to. I gathered the documents back into the envelope with the same calm I used in conference rooms when angry sons learned they could not bully their mothers out of houses. "Don't," I said. Marin froze. "Those are copies," I told her. "The originals are in my office, and every file is backed up at Kessler and Vane." Her face twisted. "You planned this." "No, I prepared for it. There's a difference. You can't take my home." I looked at the woman who had spent 31 years making sure I understood I was only almost family. And for the first time, I did not feel the old urge to explain myself gently. "I'm not taking it," I said. "I'm stopping the lie that it was ever yours." Blythe's panic came slower than Marin's, but when it arrived, it was ugly. She looked from the deed to the lease to the hospital statement, and I watched the calculations move across her face. Hawthorne Lane was not inheritance. It was not a future asset. It was not something she and Grant could quietly count on for refinancing, tuition, or the version of family she had always assumed would belong to her children by blood. "What about Ella and Hayes?" she snapped. "Have you even thought about what this does to them?" Grant lowered his phone. For once, he did not nod along with her. "Your children are innocent," I said. "Your entitlement is not." Blythe opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Calvin was crying now, quietly, shamefully, into one hand. He kept saying my name like it might undo something. "Auden, I'm sorry. I am so sorry." I wanted those words to matter more than they did. Maybe if he had said them in 2019. Maybe if he had said them in 2021. Maybe if he had said them 10 minutes earlier, before Marin turned my birthday candles into a witness stand. "Sorry is where you start," I said, "not where this ends." I did not stay for cake. I put the envelope into my bag, stood up, and pushed in my chair because some habits survive even when families do not. Marin was still talking as I left. Something about betrayal, something about humiliation. Something about how money had changed me. I did not turn around. In the hallway outside the Laurel room, Diane caught up to me. She did not ask if I was okay. Older women who have survived enough life know better than to ask useless questions in hallways. She simply wrapped both arms around me and held me like she had been waiting years to do it. "Aloys would be proud of you," she whispered. That was when I almost cried. Not in front of Marin. Not in front of Blythe. Not at the table where my mother had tried to reduce my life to a tax line. But in the quiet hall outside a restaurant, with the smell of garlic and wine in the air, and Diane's hand pressed between my shoulders, I almost broke, almost. I drove home through Asheville without turning on the radio. At my kitchen table, I took the envelope out, then Grandma Eloise's card. I placed it beside the documents, the deed, the payoff letter, the tax receipts, the lease, the hospital confirmation. Paper had done what pleading never could. It had told the truth without asking permission. By Monday morning, Nina Alvarez had sent the letter, not from me personally, through counsel. Clean, formal, impossible to twist. The unrecorded deed transfer would not be filed with the county. Quiet Ridge Holdings would remain the owner of Hawthorne Lane. The $1 a year lease would not be renewed under its old terms. A new market lease was enclosed at $2,650 a month. Calvin and Marin had 30 days to sign, respond in writing, or make other lawful arrangements through counsel. If they refused, Quiet Ridge Holdings would serve the proper written notice required under North Carolina landlord-tenant procedure and proceed from there. I did not change the locks. I did not throw their things on the lawn. I did not become the monster Marin needed me to be. I used a lawyer, a letter, and the law. Auden Pike called me 2 days later. They received it, he said. How did that go? There was a pause. Your mother called me a traitor. I closed my eyes. Of course she did, I reminded her, Auden said, his voice as flat as ever, that her landlord let her stay in that house for $1 a year for almost 6 years. What did she say? She hung up. It was not revenge in the loud way people imagine revenge. It was smaller than that, sharper. Marin had spent years surviving on a story where she and Calvin held on to Hawthorne Lane through dignity and faith. Now even the property manager knew the truth. Her miracle had a name she refused to say. The video reached the family before the end of the week. At first, Marin tried to tell everyone I had ambushed her, that I had brought legal papers to my own birthday dinner because I wanted to humiliate my parents. Blythe, still spinning, sent Grant's recording to Cousin Laurel with a message that said, "Can you believe what Auden did?" Laurel watched the whole thing, then she sent it to the family group chat. Watch from the beginning before you decide who was cruel. After that, the story stopped belonging to Marin. People heard the tax benefits line in her own voice. They saw me place the receipts on the table. They heard Calvin say he had known enough to be ashamed. Reverend Paul Whitcomb heard about it through someone at St. Mark's. The church women who had once praised Marin's faith stopped asking her to tell the Hawthorne Lane story. Nobody destroyed her publicly. They simply stopped believing her automatically. Celeste tried to defend her, of course. She said I had torn the family apart. She said blood had been disrespected. She said legal ownership was not the same as moral ownership, but the video had her in it too. Sitting there, smiling, nodding when Marin said the cruelest thing I had ever heard from my mother's mouth. After that, people did not argue with Celeste. They just stopped looking to her for the truth. Blythe called me 6 days later. Her voice was tight, angry, but not as certain as it used to be. "You embarrassed, Mom." I was standing in my office, looking out at downtown Asheville. "Did her words bother you?" I asked, "or only the fact that people heard them?" She was silent so long I thought she had hung up. Then she said, I laughed, "Yes. I don't know why. I think you do." Her breathing changed. "Because if you were beneath me," she said finally. Then I didn't have to wonder who I was without that. That was the first honest thing my sister had ever given me. I did not forgive her on the spot. I did not invite her over. I did not tell her we were fine. "We can talk another day," I said. "Not today." Calvin called the next morning. He did not ask about the lease. He did not ask for a discount. That was the only reason I stayed on the line. "I knew in 2022, he said. "Not all of it, but enough. The lease renewal, the hospital statement, Quiet Ridge." I put pieces together. "Why didn't you ask me?" "Because then I would have had to admit you were carrying us." I said nothing. "And I let you be alone in a room where I knew you had been carrying us," he said. That was the apology I had needed, and it still was not enough to fix what it named. "If you want to repair anything," I told him, "start with the truth, not tears." Marin never apologized. She left one voicemail, then another, then a third. In them, I was ungrateful. I was controlling. I had used money to punish the people who raised me. She said the house was morally hers, which was exactly the kind of sentence people use when the legal record refuses to flatter them. I saved every voicemail and forwarded them to Nina. A few weeks later, Calvin and Marin signed the market lease, not because they were grateful, because they could not find another house like Hawthorne Lane for less, and because a formal legal notice from Quiet Ridge Holdings was no longer an abstract threat they could laugh off. Every month after that, they wrote a check to Quiet Ridge Holdings. Once, Diane told me she heard Marin start to say "my house" in front of Calvin. Calvin corrected her quietly. "The house," he said. "I should not have needed that to feel like justice, but I did." I framed Grandma Eloise's card and placed it on the shelf in my office beside a copy of the county deed record. Not because I needed proof that I had won. I had spent too many years mistaking proof for love. I put it there because Eloise had seen me before the paperwork did. She had called me granddaughter before any title record, any LLC, any lease, any court filing could prove I belonged somewhere. As for Calvin, I left a very small door open. Not wide, not warm. Just open enough for truth to pass through if he kept choosing it. For Blythe, maybe there would be a conversation someday, if she learned how to stand without needing me underneath her. For Marin, the door closed. I no longer needed that woman to call me her daughter. What I lost that night was not a family. What I lost was the illusion that if I kept paying, kept helping, kept staying quiet, kept saving the roof over their heads, one day they would finally set a real place for me at the table. Hawthorne Lane stopped being a place where I begged to belong. It became what it always had been, a house, and for once the name on the paper matched the truth. If you had been in my place, would you have let Calvin and Marin stay under that roof after what happened at dinner? Or would you have told your lawyer to begin the process immediately? And what about Calvin? Could you forgive a father who knew the truth, watched you carry the family, and still stayed silent when it mattered most?